Let's do this. What's up guys, KS here. Thanks for joining me today as always. Although it's hard to believe, it's been over 2 years since I first reviewed the original Walther Q5 match, and I have to say, it's a great gun. Although I've never considered the regular PPQ line to be among my favorites, the Q5 delivered in every way I wanted it to. Aside from only having 15-round mags, it's a worthy consideration for a dedicated competition gun, yet can also fill other roles as needed. It's high on the recommendation list for those looking to get into competition or just have a great, accurate gun to plink around with. At the beginning of 2019, Walther upped the game with the introduction of the Q5 match steel frame. According to Walther, the objective for this and potentially other forthcoming releases is quality and performance at the highest level. Although that remains to be seen, my initial impressions on day one were very positive. Keep in mind that the starting price of the Q5 SF is $14.99, and that's for the non-pro version, so one may have to ask him or herself, is it worth the price? Well, maybe. I've now had the chance to spend some quality time with the Q5, both at the range and at home, and have put together my thoughts for you guys. Let's dive in and see if it stacks up and maybe surpasses the legacy of the original Q5. Alright, let's take a look at a quick comparison. Now, one gun that you guys have wanted to see this compared to quite often is the CZ Shadow 2. Now, that Q5 match steel frame is going to be about 8.7 inches long and about 5.4 inches in height, and a 5-inch barrel roughly, so the Shadow 2 is going to stack up actually really well. Now the weight of the Q5 steel frame is going to be 41.6 ounces, and it's got 17 round magazines. There are 3 of them. Of course, we'll take a look at that in more depth, but quite an interesting comparison. There will definitely be an if I could only have one in the very near future. All right, let's walk around the frame on the Q5. And I will tell you, there is a lot going on with this guy. We'll start with our grip, of course, as we always do. Now, the grip texture on this, these are actually grip panels. It's one solid panel. It's going to be a polymer grip. It's a very interesting texture, very different from some of the other firearms from Walther. And I have to say, it's pretty bitey. It's pretty nice. It's just aggressive enough. Now, this is not necessarily something I'd want up against my skin all day long because it is aggressive, but it's a competition gun. So I think they've done well with this. Now the sculpting is quite interesting. There are a couple of little humps here as well, just to give some extra contour, and definitely a pretty pronounced bump right here. And this may actually bother some people, depends on your hand size. And then we've got some really, really nice texture here on the front strap. I love the fact that they did this. I mean, the attention to detail on this is tremendous. They even carried it forward right here on the front of the trigger guard. I think it's a really nice, really attractive look. I think they've done a good job with that. Now, this is the Pro model, so it's going to come with your magazine well. There is a non-Pro model that will not come with the magazine well, and the magazines will be different. We'll get to that here in just a moment. But the mag well is really nice. It makes for a very comfortable hold. It puts that pinky out just a little bit, but it helps just kind of grip that gun and point it downward. So I think it's a really nice feel. Now, as we move up the grip, you'll notice we've got an extended beaver tail. It's significantly longer than the polymer version. And one thing I noticed, and I'll talk more about this in the shooting experience, of course, and it's hard to really capture this very well, but there actually is a really distinct little point, almost a pretty sharp point on both sides of your beaver tail right here. And you'll notice there's a little mark there. I've actually been shooting a couple of other guns. I'll get to that at a later time. But I guess I have a pronounced a little knuckle bone right there, and so some guns bother me a little bit more than others. And so as long as I stayed pretty firmly planted with this and really got my grip up as high as possible, I didn't really notice it very much, but every once in a while it would bump me a little bit. I'd notice it wasn't that big of a deal, left a little bit of a bruise, not too bad. And then there's a little bit of an undercut here under the trigger guard as well. I like that. Again, I think the ergos on this are really solid, especially for people that have maybe medium, large, and over hands. If you've got smaller hands, this might be a little bit of a chunk for you. As we move on to the controls, the magazine release is not ambi out of the box, although you can swap it around. But in terms of the slide lock slide release, it is definitely ambi, and it's a really large paddle. It's really nice, worked very well. It's very similar to the Q5 polymer. I think they've done a really good job with that. And then we've got our takedown lever. They call it an easy takedown lever. I will get to that here in just a moment. But as we continue to move up the frame, one thing you'll notice, we've got our accessory rail, of course, for your lights, lasers, chainsaws, that sort of thing. But they've done a really good job with the millwork. I think it's highly stylized, and I think it's really cool looking. Now, they've given us some extra rail points as well. It's a little bit longer of a dust cover than the regular Q5 match polymer. So there is definitely a fair amount of steel, a fair amount of weight. It keeps that, that muzzle down, that recoil impulse really light. Again, I'll talk more about that in the shooting experience. But overall, in terms of the frame, man, I'll tell you what, I think they've done a great job with that, and it's quite hefty. Now, I did mention again that this is the Pro model with the magwell, and so your magazines, and it did come with 3, they are actually going to have a +2 base plate, so that makes them 17 rounds. Frankly, I think that's what the Q5 should have been all along, 17 rounds. So I'm glad to see that they did that, but you have to get the Pro model to bump up to the 17 rounds. So I think some people might not appreciate that entirely too much. And then, of course, one other thing that grabs your attention is the trigger, which we'll spend some time on a little bit later. But it certainly is an eye catcher, especially in an otherwise black steel firearm. So again, there's your frame. A lot going on there. All right, let's take this thing down and see what's going on the inside. Of course, you do have to lock it back. Of course, there's no magazine in it or anything like that. And then we've got an easy lever right here. It actually goes up. It doesn't go down or anything like that, but very easy to work. And then you can release your slide. It will not come off yet. You do need to pull the trigger, very similar to the polymer firearms out there. And once you do, everything comes apart very easy. So we'll go ahead and take all of this stuff apart and take a look at the components. Now, we'll start with our guide rod and spring assembly. Again, it is steel. It's actually pretty hefty, and it's captive. They've done a good job with that. And then we've got our barrel. That's pretty average barrel. It's certainly starting to show a little bit of wear. I've been to the range several times with this, but you know, it's done fine. It's got a really nice polished feed ramp on it, and yeah, I like it. I mean, you know, it's a barrel. And then we've got our slide, and we'll talk more about the slide features, of course, here in just a minute. But in terms of maintenance, I mean, it's extremely easy. Most modern guns really these days are. It's all very clean and tidy. And you know, again, I think the precision millwork they've done with this is fantastic. And then, of course, the frame, I mean, this frame is quite substantial. I mean, on its own, it's fairly hefty. But again, I think it looks fantastic. I love the blue controls here. And I don't know if they've done some sort of coating on this, maybe an NP3 or something. If you know, you'll have to holler down in the comments. But again, you know, it's quite nice. Now, in terms of reassembly, of course, we just do everything backwards. We'll grab our slide and our barrel, get all that seated just like that. Then we'll get our guide rod and spring assembly. Go in, make sure that that sits on the lug as such. And then we'll just throw it back on the frame. And we do need to lock it back, so we'll do that just like that. And we'll throw our takedown lever and function check, and we are good to go. So that is your disassembly on the Q5 match steel frame. All right, let's take a look at the slide for a moment or two, and it's very similar to the Q5 match polymer. There isn't a lot of difference there. Of course, it says SF, so a slightly different call out, but I will tell you, it's highly stylized. There's a lot of millwork going into this. It was the same with the polymer version, and that was one of the real driving factors for me with the polymer. I thought it was just such a cool, different looking gun. I love the lightning cuts here just to cut down on some of the weight on the front. It looks like you could almost even run with a ported barrel if you wanted to. There are some of those interesting cuts up front here. But again, it breaks up the slide. This makes for some pretty good serration, so you can definitely work the slide without too much of an issue. It does have the Walther banner. I'm not that much of a fan of the Walther banner, but you know, everybody has their own taste. But otherwise, they've done a great job. Now, it does have the rear serrations. Once again, there's a lot of bite. You can definitely use those, not too big of a deal at all. But then you'll notice as we move up the slide, it is cut for a red dot. And one thing they include are actually 3 of these little base plates here, so you can run with most of your popular optics. So any of your Trigicons and Leopolds, Burris, Vortex, all that kind of stuff, they will all work on this. But one thing you will notice when you take that plate off to run your optic, you do lose the rear sight. I know a lot of people have a hang up with that. Now this is strictly competition, or I think this is strictly competition. So losing your rear co-witness or natural co-witness, you know, I don't think that's too big of a deal on a competition gun. If this was a carry gun or something, I would have different thoughts on that. But otherwise, it's nice that they give you the red dot optic. That just seems to be more and more prevalent. More and more manufacturers are going to that. Now, in terms of sights, of course, we do have a really, really nice big front fiber optic. I always switch it out for green. It does come with red. And then as we move down, we've got some really nice serrations to cut down a little bit on glare. Again, a lot of attention to detail on this. And then as we get to our rear sight, it is blacked out. See if I can capture that in the light reasonably well. And it is adjustable, which is really nice. So you can make your fine tuning and adjusting just to suit your needs. Now I found out of the box that this basically shot point of aim, point of impact. Again, I'll talk about the shooting experience more here in just a moment. But overall, I think Walther has done a great job with this. I mean, I think they had a winner with the Q5 polymer. So carrying a lot of that same pedigree forward was very smart on them. So there you go. There's the whole package. Now let's take a look at a little bit of shooting. The shooting experience with the Walther Q5 Match SF was fantastic. Even with a not so great shooting day for yours truly, the gun performed flawlessly. It stayed firmly planted in hand and flat even with my arthritic and shaky hands. One thing I did notice very quickly, however, was that the gun shot low every once in a while. With the added weight of the extra steel rail and guide rod, I found myself dipping the nose down when it really didn't need to happen. That's a training issue and caused by me shooting other guns that need to be more compensated to keep the muzzle down. On a subsequent range visit, that was less apparent, but I prefer to show you guys the first trip whenever possible to highlight that first unbiased experience. Another thing I noticed was that the contouring of the extended beaver tail has two distinct sharp points. For many hand shapes, this would not be a big deal at all, but for my hands, I felt it. And after 300 rounds, I knew I wanted to stop. I developed a souvenir bruise for the effort, but you know what? It was totally worth it because the gun is truly a great shooter. It's accurate and flat, and the recoil impulse is barely perceivable. I think Walther has a winner on their hands for those looking to get into a higher tier competition gun that has a polymer pedigree but a full steel frame. Now let's take a look at that eye-catching blue trigger. All right, let's take a look at the trigger for a moment or two. Now, one thing I noticed, and I think I mentioned this on a Wednesday chat with Big Johnson Guns and Gear in 1776 or Bust, that in watching a couple of other videos with this prior to me getting my hands on it, it looked like the trigger was a little bit heavier and the reset was not as short as I remember. So let's take a look at this and see if it is true. So we've got our take-up right here, and I will tell you this take-up is ultra smooth. I mean, there's almost no effort to get to your wall, and it is a defined wall. And there's your break. Now that break is coming in right around 4 pounds. I occasionally get a little bit lighter and a little bit heavier than that, so average it out at 4 pounds. And then your reset is right there. That's your reset. Now, a couple of things. I think this trigger should have been a little bit lighter, to be honest with you. I would have liked to have seen 3 to 3.5 pounds since this is a competition gun. And then that reset, again, I'll show you. There's your reset. Now, I'm being a little bit picky here. I feel like the reset on some PPQs is actually shorter than that. Now, it's pretty short, and it definitely does the job. There's not a lot of room for wiggle before you get back to your wall, but still, I feel like that reset could have been a little bit shorter, and the poundage on the trigger could have been a little bit lighter as well. Be interested to hear your feedback in the comments on that one. So guys, what do I think of the Walther Q5 Match steel frame overall? Well, overall, I like it, and I like it a lot. Now, there are a couple of things I ding it for. First, that over-stylized beaver tail, and I understand that all people's hand sizes are different, so you're going to react differently to every gun out there. For me, those little bumps, those sharp little bumps, I notice them a little bit. For you, that may not be the case. So I think they probably could have maybe toned that down just a little bit. And then the other big thing for me is the price. Guys, these are expensive firearms. The non-pro coming in at just under $1,500. $100, and the Pro a few $100s more than that. That's a lot. Now, you do get a lot with it, of course. You get the 3 magazines with the Pro, you get the extended base plates, making them 17 rounds. I think for that price, 4 magazines should have been mandatory. That's just my opinion. Now, it is optics cut, which is great. You get the different base plates. Some people will ding this because you can't do the natural co-witness with your rear sight. You lose it with those base plates. However, it's a competition gun, so I don't ding it at all for that. The trigger out of the box is great. It's not perfect. I think it could have been a little bit more refined than it was, but it is still very good for sure. And the overall ergonomics on this are fantastic. I think Walther really put a lot of time and effort into the grip texture, whether it be the polymer grip or the cuts in the steel. I think it's very thoughtful. And overall, it's a good looking gun. I always thought the polymer version was good looking as well. So guys, I'm really curious to know what you think about this. If you've gotten one or if you're thinking about getting one, we're definitely going to do some comparisons with this guy, so you'll see it again for sure. So looking forward to those comments, guys. Sound off down below. Otherwise, thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you next time.